Hey, Tim, it's another Friday and it's another episode of our lunchtime podcast.
Good day, Merv. How are you doing?
Excellent I shouldn't say excellent as usual because it's not always excellent, but excellent. How about you?
Doing very well.
Yeah.
I was doing some research on our topic today, collaboration, and it put me in a really good mood earlier in the week. And I'd like to share a bit of that with you today.
That'd be great. I know last week we had, I think we had a lot of fun doing the podcast on negotiations and I'm glad you thought of the fact that collaboration just naturally extends from or part of negotiations. So take it away.
Yeah,
Get us out.
it is frightening because as project managers, we tend to be isolated and we tend to separate ourselves from others. I have it. The buck stops here. Just let me deal with this. It'll be all right. And collaboration says, let's figure this out together. I don't have all the answers. It really rung home to me true when I left the consulting group and I was working for small businesses, basically new product development for small businesses inside the corporation. I was doing marketing and I was managing a lot of the project implementations. And in LinkedIn, when we finally ramped down that little organization after 2 years, it was fairly successful. Um, One of the people went on to LinkedIn and said, Tim is amazing. It really is strange because it looks like he's not doing anything, but he goes to a room or he's in a meeting or something and everything seems to work. It's really weird. And I was thinking, I don't do anything. That's a backhanded compliment. But at the same time, I was thinking, yeah, that's what a manager's supposed to do. It's not that I'm not doing anything. I'm doing everything that makes everybody else's job easy.
I thought what you were going to say. That's right. A manager's job is I don't do anything.
Yeah,
What
no, it's doing everything that's easy, which includes making sure everybody knows why.
so important. I tell you what, I used to get so frustrated as a junior developer or even as a team lead, and my boss, my manager, my project manager wouldn't tell me why we were doing something. Because that if I know why, it informs the how for me.
Yeah,
Right.
it's really weird. We put the why on the side, and we
Yeah.
think the why just points the arrow to the how and the what, but the why is central to the how and the what. And projects oftentimes change their purpose and change their objective. And sometimes we have to call a halt and say, wait, this is so important. We need to sort this out. Um, this is, we can't do any more work until we figure out if we're able to work together towards what we need.
Well, there's that. Plus, the why always made me feel like I was just a cog in a wheel. Like I wasn't really part of the project. If I wasn't worthy of understanding why, I was just supposed to do and die. Right. So
Well,
yeah.
and that's the problem. Human beings, because they're human, um, if they're not working on purposeful work, don't feel like they are doing anything meaningful. And if I'm not doing anything meaningful, am I anything meaningful? And it leads down to this horrible existential crisis. And this is one of the reasons why this whole collaboration and taking on this persona of creating that perfect environment where the people can do things in an unobstructed way and it makes it easy for them to be successful is critical.
It does. So I also did a little research because I knew we were going to be talking about collaboration. My research extended to this point. I looked up the definition from in a dictionary.
What did you
Well,
get? What did you
what
get?
I got was the action of working with someone, but it didn't stop there because that I knew that the action of working with someone, but it's to produce or create something. So you're collaborating for an end result. And I thought that was a very simple definition, sometimes simplicity is the best. But that simple definition says you and I, Tim, are collaborating, for example, on this podcast to create something educational for our listeners.
Exactly. Exactly. Now, from a management standpoint, a lot of time that means facilitation, which means, again, we won't do the work per se, but we're going to make sure the work is done well. And we're going to make sure the work is done in the way we planned, or we change the plan, or we change the work.
Yeah. And I'll tell you, you said we don't typically do the work, and that's true, we don't. But one of the things that I really enjoyed watching, I was doing an oversight on a project, and I watched this very senior project manager, basically in control of almost 200 developers and analysts on this project, very large project, and got into this collaboration with a development team. They discussed some stuff. Then he sat down with one of the developers and walked through his code with him. And I thought, that's interesting. I mean, for me, don't ask me to do that. I have forgotten my coding ability a long time ago. But he took his collaboration from just one of getting consensus on what needs to be done to actually sitting down and showing that person technically what needs to be done. I thought that was a very good example of a senior project manager being very collaborative and very understanding of the relationship he had with those developers.
Well, and it's very powerful. It's not powerful such that he can do it and demonstrate it and he helps make better code, but the ability to sit down and recognize that the people are doing something important and demonstrating that they know this. Their actions often speak much louder than the words. I can say you're doing great, but if I sit down and I say, "Wow, can you show me your code? Let's walk through this." It's like, "Yeah, this is what I care about. Great. Let's go
Yes.
through it and do that." And all of a sudden, you're not just speaking to the work, you're speaking to the human being doing the work.
Well, and what's interesting, I just had a recent experience. I'm actually advising on a project for a large organization, and my partner and I were in a what we call a hot topics meeting, which we do every day because there are there are certain things that we have to deal with immediately as an executive team. And we're I wouldn't say we're hard on the system integrator, but we're making sure every single day that the system integrator is managing to their objectives, managing to their work plan, managing to what they promised in their proposal, right? So that's our job. And towards the end of our hot topic sessions, after working out some situations that we needed to deal with, my partner looked at them and he said, "You know what? I just got to tell you, you guys are doing a great job. You guys are managing this really well. And your team is helping us. You're doing a great job." And so he didn't have to say that. We're there, we're their oversight essentially. And the project manager from the system integrator looked at us and said, "That means a lot coming from you guys." So to me, even though we were on opposite sides, I mean, when you look at contractually, we're on opposite sides. Collaboratively, we're trying to get the same product out the door. But the fact that he was able to instill that kind of response from the project manager from the system integrator, I thought was a very strong collaborative move and showed that very well.
Yeah, that's a very powerful statement.
Yeah.
So if you go further into your research and collaboration, you look it up in the exam content outline at the Project Management Institute application page for the PMP exam, and they have examples of what collaboration means. And we can touch on some of these. We can leave others alone. And what I'd like to do is gravitate to something that actually piques your interest. Like some of these statements are evaluating engagement needs for
Yeah.
stakeholders,
Yep.
optimizing alignment between stakeholder needs, and building trust and influencing stakeholders. So where would you like to start with that list?
Why don't we start with the first one? I think you talked, was it evaluating needs of our
Yes,
stakeholders?
evaluating engagement needs.
Engagement.
Engagement,
Yeah.
yeah, engagement means participation and involvement. And so what do you think about the needs of stakeholders to be involved, and how do you figure out what they need?
Well, this is interesting because I think again, it's almost situational depending on the contract that I happen to be on. Now we know their needs, their system needs, because we have responded to a proposal or to a request for proposal. So we know that part. We know the organization's needs. But now we're meeting the stakeholders, senior, maybe not so senior, but we're meeting all of the stakeholders. And so I think what we now look at is what are the specific individual's needs. The CEO's needs are different than the line manager's needs, are different than the people that deal with their public's needs. So I think I haven't addressed your question yet, but let me leave it there and give you a chance to respond. What I've kind of done is paint my picture as to how I would look at looking at those needs.
Let's look at it as a systemic model too, and I'll put another dimension onto this.
Okay.
So you have the business needs, and that's what you were talking about, the purpose of the project.
Yeah.
Why do we need that, right?
Yep.
And then you have the purpose itself and the needs for that purpose to be, instantiated or created. And then you have the project, because the project supports the purpose and the purpose supports the business. So it's almost like peeling an onion, and we're still nowhere near the stakeholders.
Yeah.
So this is the beautiful thing. When we're talking about collaboration, we're tying the project to the purpose to the business. And then, like you said, we have all these individuals and groups and entities that we have to figure out and we have to evaluate. Now, with a really large project, is that pretty formal activity?
No, in my experience, it has not been. Although, let me back off on that. A lot of times when we come into an organization and don't know a lot of the people very well yet, we do use a tool, which I'm sure people are familiar with, called I'm trying to think of the name, stakeholder engagement assessment matrix or something like that. Where basically, if you look at the X axis, you're looking at the interest of a particular stakeholder. And you look at the Y axis, you're looking at let's say the influence or the power of that stakeholder. And so what we do, and it's kind of mechanical, it's kind of not fair to the individual who are human beings, but it's a good way of kind of understanding your stakeholders before you really get to know them. So you end up looking at someone, perhaps a stakeholder, maybe low interest and low influence. Maybe they've got low interest, but they're high influence. That's a different way of dealing with that, with their needs, right? Where you get someone who has high interest, but low influence, and high interest and high influence. So we look at, from a matrix point of view, we try to pin our stakeholders in one of those boxes. That's why I say I don't really like these mechanical things, because it takes the human part out of it. But it really is quite an effective way at starting to at least understand the kinds of questions to ask our stakeholders when we begin to work with them, so that we do truly understand and assess their needs.
Yeah, and then on top of that, we have, basically, are they supportive or not?
Yeah.
And we can actually look at this positive, negative, supportive thing. And we can look at the positive, negative involvement thing. And we can start putting that clinical data analysis with the human behavior, with our perception of, do these guys really want this project to be successful? Why or why not? What is causing them? And that's the human behavior that I think that you prefer and you enjoy, is figuring out the human component and how can I get these people onto my side of the table?
Well, and how can I develop that relationship with them? Because to me, project management is, yes, it's technical, and yes, it's all of that. But above all, for me, it's the relationship,
Yeah.
and that's the important part for me.
Yeah. Let's drop down to um let's drop down to expectations, Because if we're going to talk about needs, let's bring in something even that's more like smoke. Expectations are weird because they're not requirements and they're not necessary, but they're things that people think should be there and they're not so vocal. How do you get a handle around those?
I think it's much like the previous discussion where you kind of analyze where they fit in that quadrant, but then start to develop that relationship. Now, and I'll tell you some of the toughest ones I've had. One situation I can think of, for example, I had someone who had low interest. He was a high influence stakeholder within the organization, but had low interest. And I'm trying to think, why are you basically the main sponsor of this project if you have such low interest? And so when you look at the expectations, and when we got to talk to him, and here's what happened. We were having steering committee meetings once a month, which is pretty normal, right? For most projects. He wanted to move them to once a quarter. We felt that would not work. And so we went and talked to him directly. And here's what we found out. He had such high regard for our company. He didn't know our team, but he had such high regard for our company. He didn't think he had to be involved. He thought magic would happen just by letting us go. And so that was his expectation, which we quickly corrected. We said, no, you still need to be involved because we are not magicians. We are at your beck and call, and we need to satisfy your requirements. And so subtly, we changed his expectations to one of getting much more involved and much more guiding of us through the project. That's just one example, Tim.
Let me give you another example.
Yeah.
So we're opening up a new market for my company, right? And I was just one part of the portfolio management. I had the dashboard and the communications, and I had the project management information system, and make sure everybody was on the same line and had all the knowledge and information they needed. Right? I wasn't working directly with the teams, but I was working on the mechanism of keeping the information flowing. Now, the management team had gone to sales and they said, we need to know what sales needs from us, because usually you create some pilots, you create some prototypes, and you get sales involved really early. And the vice president of sales had said, okay, what's the revenue target for year one? Oh, it's going to be $10 million. Oh, that's too low. If it's anything below $1 billion revenue, I don't care about it. Okay. And that was the end of conversation. Well, 6 weeks before launch, 4,000 sales reps from around the world had seen all of our ads, seen all the marketing, seen all the banners on the internet, and said, where's my prototype? So I have one expectation from the vice president, and we have 4,000 influencers. And if you don't get sales behind you, your product's dead, right? And so we had to actually architect one of our functional prototypes into something that the sales could take to the field as a demonstration. That was the scariest moment I've ever been participating, much less managing a project.
Well, and that's true. And I think I said earlier, I think it's hard to answer some of these questions. And I'm glad I'm not taking the PMP exam right now. But when you look at some of these, they really are very situational.
Yes. You know? Yeah. And it's not, I made a mistake and it's going to fail. It's the house is on fire and we need to course correct. And you have to have that mindset. And as a project manager, you're not just holding on to that idea. You're enforcing that idea on everybody else while you're holding on to that.
Yeah. And I can think of a recent project where the director for my client organization was expecting perfection. Now, in our line of work, there is no such thing as perfection. But when I got to know her and develop that relationship, what I found was she was expecting perfection because this was her first major project in this role, and she didn't want it to fail on her watch. And so she wanted, I mean, many ways, the perfection came out of this need for absolute success. So rather than spend a lot of time saying, no, no, don't worry about it and stuff, I just took it upon myself that once a week, twice a week, 3 times a week, I would meet with her and educate her on some aspect, keep her informed of some aspect of the project. And as the project went along and there was little hiccups here and there, it was much easier than to say why perfection didn't happen in that situation. And therefore, it's not that we lowered her expectations. It's just that we made her expectations a little more realistic. But again, it was understanding her need, and then kind of morphing into that person that could help her meet her expectations. Very successful project. And I made a friend to this day from that project.
You know, this whole idea of training, I would put the management and setting of expectations under the category of training for all of my projects.
Yeah.
One of the things that I have issue with is the lack of formal training for anybody who goes into a management position. Whether you're working on a business undergraduate degree or graduate degree, they really enforce one concept to you. You know, the results of your analysis and estimates are based on your ability to collect good and reasonable and enough data and apply a thoughtful analysis that is relevant to the question you're asking. And it takes you sometimes 2 or 3 classes to go through and find out. That means I'm not going to give you an estimate that it's going to be done by August 21st. That's not the way this game plays. What we have is a ranged, we have somewhere around week 3, and there's a chance, there's a 12% chance outside of week 3, either way. And this is something that, you know, we forget that, you know, we have months, if not years of research and practice and analysis and results that we don't have a chance to share this wisdom with, you know, and that's one of the best tools we have to combat this whole thing of expectations and getting people to start to release their expectations for something better.
Yeah. And, I like what you were talking about in terms of the education aspect of this, and that we don't do enough of that. And I was earlier in my career, I was highly critical of the Project Management Institute's garnering of the whole PMP certification. Because what I was finding was people who would they would kind of stretch their qualifications to allow them to sit for the exam. And they were excellent students. They could remember ideas and they would get their certification, but it no more made them a project manager than, sitting in a chicken coop makes you a chicken. And it was one of those things that I was frustrated. And what I wanted our organizations to do was to actually put people in those positions and get them kind of experienced, and then, kind of deal with those certification issues. But such as it, I'm glad PMP has now put much more emphasis on the exam content outline and that sort of thing, so that people are much more equipped now than perhaps in the earlier days. But the educational aspect, if I get my PMP, it's up to me not only to run my projects according to a great guideline, but it's also up to me to impart that knowledge to my team leads so that they can sit for the exam and do the same for their leads and that sort of thing. So education to me is absolutely critical.
Yeah. And it's not acquisition of knowledge. You're right.
Right.
Passing the exam or become a project manager is not knowing the right or wrong things. It's a mindset. And it's having the ability to basically respond to the hiccups and burps that happen throughout the day. And you can't teach that in a classroom. You really can't.
You can't. And here's what's interesting. And I'm glad we're talking about collaboration, because I've got 40 some years under my belt in IT over 25 of that is in direct project management, hands-on. Today, even today, in managing a fairly large in an advisory capacity, a fairly large project, I still struggle with certain issues or certain problems or certain challenges that I go to my business partners and say, let's collaborate on this and come up with a effective strategy.
You know
So
what?
even today, I collaborate.
It's exactly right. It's just like archery. Just because I hit the center of the bullseye yesterday doesn't mean I'm going to hit it today. And I need to approach this with the same mind, the same attention and focus, the same rule set in order to do that. And I may or may not do that. And we have to actually remind ourselves, much less train others, that this is a highly probabilistic endeavor. And we have to actually be the ones who learn how to quantify, put our hands around this, and raise the probability of success through this work.
Well, and that's why I think we're trying to also impart to those people listening to us, especially those who are striving to become effective project managers. I think the whole idea, again, last week was negotiation. This week it's collaboration. The idea is that we take these soft skills and we hone them and we work on them. There is no lack of power or influence if I go to someone else and ask for help. In fact, if I go to someone else and ask for help, I think that creates more of an influence within my status on a project than if I just try to be a lone wolf all the time.
We're going to have to explore that in a little bit. There's an incredible wise truth there. And we'll talk about that in a few minutes.
Good,
So,
because 15 years ago, I wouldn't have had that same truth. I was the lone wolf. I could do it all.
So let's talk about this word optimize. Why do you think PMI says optimize alignment between stakeholder needs, expectations, and objectives?
I'm not sure why PMI does. I know why I do it. And that's because every single project I've ever been on, for whatever reason, when we bid it, and when we lay out our project plan, we come at it with a sense of optimism. And then when reality strikes and we start to get behind, we have to optimize every single piece of effort that we have. So if I'm looking, for example, I think I used an example earlier where I had someone of high influence, low interest, or perhaps even I have a stakeholder who's got low influence and low interest. I may selfishly optimize my time and my effort by spending less time with that person than someone who can absolutely help me leapfrog the challenge I'm having right now. So in optimizing when it comes to stakeholders, sometimes I have to be a little selfish just to be able to produce what I promised I would produce.
Well, there's another side to optimization. You can't just maintain a budget and expect to add scope without impacting the budget. You can't add scope and not expect the schedule to go out. And so when we're optimizing expectations and needs, the needs are the scope growing, and the expectations are we're going to stay with the original schedule budget. And that's a dilemma. That ain't going to happen. And so it's our job to actually, like I said, optimize alignment, which means train and teach people in the theory of constraints, train and teach people in understanding what their requirements cost, and also help them understand that it's not just them that the project is supporting. And this is hard.
Well, it's hard, but I'll tell you, whenever I've been, and I learned this the hard way, but probably the last 3 or 4 projects where I was I was specifically hands-on managing projects, I started the education process before we got into the issue. So that when we got into the issue, I was able to remind them of what they had already learned. You can't add 5 new interfaces and not expect me to charge you for that because I have to bring in 2,000 hours of extra effort to make that happen. There's that collaboration, but there's that optimization of the messaging that I started way before the issue ever came into light.
It's gently establishing reality.
Okay.
It's saying, yeah, we can spend 3 extra days on vacation, and here's the impact of that decision. Are you willing to pay for that impact? And all of a sudden, optimization goes into a space of benefits and cost.
Yeah.
And this is where things get really interesting. What if I were to define optimal and optimizing as the perfect balance of benefit and cost? That's basically where we are. Now we're talking about a math exercise, and we're having people analyze the data with us. We're on the same side of the table, and we're trying to use the same view to actually figure this out. I agree with you. This collaboration is mostly a human factor component, but data and the analysis of data is an incredibly powerful tool here.
Well, and to be able to effectively use that analysis, that's why I mentioned I started early. So not only do I build upon that relationship, and as that relationship gets stronger, I know that something like this is going to hit the project at some point. That relationship and that pre-education is what then allows me to, as you say, the data, just to show the data. This is what you're asking for. This is now increasing the scope of the project. This is, and there's times, by the way, in that collaboration where I know it's not going to cost me that much, but the goodwill is going to far exceed what it costs, that I'll say, you know what, I'll do it this time, but here's what I'm expecting next time. So we're always negotiating, we're always collaborating, but we're always maintaining that relationship.
This is the whole key. And it's not anybody's way or the highway. It's finding that middle way that everybody can live with, within the expectations and within reality, what we can really pull off. And you're right. Starting off on that mindset is the only way you can actually finish most projects successfully. I bless the team charter and whoever created the idea of putting a document together that said, here's how we're going to work together. And here's the terminology we're going to use. This is what collaboration is. This is what negotiation is. And the establishment of the team charter, I really think, is the first training that we have as a group to get off on the right foot.
No, I totally agree with that. And now we're dealing with our team, but when you're in a client situation, you have a project charter, but it typically doesn't go to that level. And so maybe we need to start adding a couple extra chapters in terms of the human behavioral aspects between client and system integrator, or client and advisor.
And
I
and
think
and
I think we got something here, Tim.
and you know what? Who says that the stakeholders cannot collaborate in developing the team charter or the project charter? Because all of a sudden, the team are the ones who do the work. But what do stakeholders do? Don't they help us with gathering requirements? Don't they help us with user acceptance testing? And these are the things that keep me up at night. And I'm saying, you know, maybe this whole concept of team versus stakeholder, this boundary is not so well defined. Maybe it's a little bit gray in there, and I have to allow for that play.
No, I think that's exactly right. It goes back to every situation is slightly different, and you have to be able to read your client and keep that collaboration strong. I'm thinking now of a situation where I was advising a client organization, and I looked at, and I think I've told this story before, but it's worth telling again. And I'm looking at the project plan, and I'm looking at the fact that user acceptance testing is coming a large project in 9 months. And I panicked. Now, a lot of people say 9 months, that's forever. And by the way, this was a waterfall. So if anybody's listening, they're agile. Yes, we did have a user acceptance test at the end, but I'm panicking because I knew how large this project was. I knew how many functions we had to test, and 9 months didn't seem enough time to get prepared to start to test. But I had developed a relationship with the CEO such that I went to that person and I said, I need 20 staff to help me full time out of the field. And I want your brightest and your best. And the way you're going to understand who I need is when I select someone and your manager has tears in their eyes, I know I have the right person. If the manager is smiling when I select someone, I know I've got the wrong person. But I want 20 of your brightest and best. And because of the relationship, because of the collaboration up front, I was able to get those 20. We had 9 months to prepare and we hit the ground running on the first day of user acceptance test and never stopped.
This is the art of project management, not just the skill, but the art. And you're right. It's human behavior. It's knowing when to pull out your relationship card and knowing when to influence and create that environment of collaboration. These are all parts of projects, but it's where do I use this and how do I use this and when do I use this to pull it out? And that's what separates a good project from a great project.
Well, in the example I just used, the CEO knew from the proposal that they were required to do user acceptance testing. What she didn't know was what that meant and what effort would be required. And so again, as the project advisor, I was able to keep that education going and to keep that relationship strong such that we were successful in attaining the right resources. But how many people don't think that way? And suddenly you're a week away from having to do your acceptance testing and you realize you haven't written a single test script.
I have another question for you. Okay, so we talk about expectations, and both of you and I agree that expectations are tricky from the get-go because they're perceptions and opinions, not necessarily facts and figures, not necessarily requirements. So, how do you address expectations and how do you actually get these people with expectations outside of the scope of the project, yet you still keep these people positively engaged?
Yeah, I think it's exactly everything that we've been talking about. It comes down to that relationship. But and by the way, it comes down to communication also. Because if you've never had the communication, by the way, I like the way you described expectations. The one adjective you left out was incorrect. Sometimes they have incorrect expectations.
Yeah.
That through your relationship, you have to be able to suddenly get them to change their mind slowly so that it's a much more doable or much more accurate expectation for the project. But yeah, it comes down to that communication such that you draw out of them. You watch them in meetings, you watch their body language, but also in that communication, you draw out of them what it is that they need. And sometimes over a cup of coffee in the cafeteria, you can throw out a comment, get a comment back and realize there was a hidden expectation that no one was even aware of. So communication, Tim.
Yeah, and let me add just one other aspect to that. It is the communication, and sometimes you need to deconstruct the expectations and then build the reality. I've tried to do both at the same time sometimes, and it confuses people and frustrates me.
Yeah.
It really does because you have to get their buy-in to say this expectation doesn't work here. So you can get to, okay, if that doesn't work, what can we do? And they're two separate battles, and there's two separate debates that you have to have. You have to have them let go, and then you have to have them in a position where they're comfortable in taking your advice.
I like how you were describing that initially, 'cause it reminded me of a saying I used to have on projects in any of those situations. And it was from my farmer days, but it was, you never try to teach a pig to sing.
Right.
It wastes your time and it annoys the pig.
Exactly.
So,
Exactly. And that's the problem. We think we're doing a great job,
yeah.
but that great job is in our head. And we've had that debate for us for the last 5 weeks.
Yeah.
Now we have to actually introduce this whole concept of we need to debate. That's number one. That's doing it way ahead. Number two, here's the expectation. Number three, it's not near the objective at all. And number four, here's what we can do instead.
Yeah.
And this, like I said, in our heads, we know how all these things fit together at the same time, but we have to be patient with the people around us and lead them through the same logic that we went through to build these ideas in our heads.
Yeah. So if I'm listening to Tim and Merv right now, and I'm fairly young and I'm trying to get some real mechanics in that. So what kind of, how would you use collaboration, for example, to get to that common set of objectives that you were just talking about with your, with your client so that you can align expectations with what's doable?
First of all, find out some common thread that connects everybody in the room. Do some type of smoothing, even if there's no conflict. Make sure there's some compelling need for everybody to work together. Okay. That's job one. With that in place, then that's like the foundation of the house. With that in place, then we can construct the logic and we can say, okay, let's do a little prioritization. This is my must have. This is my we should have. This is we could have if we wanted. Now here's what we won't do.
Yeah.
And it's something that we actually don't give to them. We help them work through this. Prioritization is a powerful tool. And again, it's our job not to do the argument debate, but to make sure everybody's following the same rule set to get to what the project really needs.
Well, and if you go to a whiteboard with a whiteboard marker in hand and start laying those out, you can be the innocent arbitrator. You can just be taking almost like just letting them spawn their ideas and lay them down and then watch them as they prioritize and guide them in that prioritization. So, but it's visible, then it's visual. They can see exactly what it is that you're working towards in that prioritization scheme. So that then when you get to the part that you won't do or can't do, it's less of a surprise. And because they're seeing this whole list of things you can do, those couple of things you can't, that's fine. We'll worry about those later.
And it's chipping away. Here's the business. Here's the corporation. Here's the purpose of this project. And, that's basically the objective. And this is why they're setting aside our time and money for us to do this. And then we can actually say, how are we going to use this wisely to actually fulfill the needs? Needs, not expectations, not wants and desires. And yes, it takes a lot of prioritization and there's a lot of maintaining ground rules as we go through it. But you know what? If you do that at the beginning of the project, whether it's informal or formal, it actually sets not just the boundaries of the project, but how we're going to treat each other and how we're going to do the work together. This is an opportunity for the project manager to establish the culture of the project.
Absolutely. And I remember you and I had a discussion one time, and you'd also talked about the fact that you want to, in these exchanges, you want to be able to create value from that exchange. Because if I can create value for my client or my customer or the person I'm collaborating with within each exchange, such that we aren't both stronger from the exchange, I think that is a huge objective that, when realized, adds to the success of any project or any endeavor.
That's where an organization or a company or a client will constantly think of another project manager. Yeah, we didn't get exactly what we wanted, but boy, we got something even better. And those are the type of consulting project managers who get repeat business.
Yeah. You had mentioned earlier something about trust and influence. What did you have in mind there around trust and influence?
Well, with collaboration, trust and influence um, are they're not just contributions to make collaboration work better. They're actually demonstration that collaboration is the best way to go. Let me give you an example. If I do something for you on a repeated basis, you have a higher expectation that you're going to have a better result, right? With if we do it this way. And so you don't just trust the process, you trust working with me. Now, if I do this over time with collaboration, that trust ensures that the collaboration may not go the way Tim wants, but it's going to be better than Tim thinks about right now. It's going to be better than anybody else thinks about in the room. And that's where you can actually use trust to improve the opportunity for collaboration to do its money. It's magic. Now that's trust. Let's talk about influence. Influence is understanding human behaviors and understanding the triggers, the emotional triggers we all have, and understanding how to use the emotions to actually help people get not just the idea, but the context of the idea. Get people behind you, not just, get people to follow your directions, but actually get people to support. And like I said, it's not just people signing up to do work. It's people wanting to do work that's meaningful for them. So we're looking at trust and we're looking at influence actually be components of helping people do work better.
Well, and I guess as I was listening to you, I was thinking that they're probably more than just components. I think they're the key components because I don't know how you can have collaboration, as I understand the definition of collaboration, without trust and influence.
Yeah.
Because if I don't trust you, I'm not sure that the next thing that comes out of your mouth is for my good, right?
Yeah.
Am I negotiating in a win-win or am I negotiating in a win-lose situation, right?
Right. And it even goes down to reports showing up on my desk every morning at 8 a.m.
Yeah.
Am I going to have to remind you again today to send me that report? And again, and again, and again. And this is where trust actually makes the team and makes any type of well-defined group function very easily and effective.
If I look at the idea of influence also, I used to shy away from calling myself an expert. And when I really think about it, you know, there are people who have 40 years of IT experience like I have, but it's 1 year of experience 40 times. In my situation, I believe that I have 40 years of IT experience that has built year upon year upon year. And as a result of that, I have developed certain expertise in certain areas, not in all, but in certain areas. And I think I'm allowed as an expert in those areas to influence for the better of my client or my team's success, not to influence them in terms of what benefits me, but influence them in terms of what I have seen before and therefore can guide them towards a successful outcome as a result of my expertise and the influence that I can draw from that expertise. So I think influence is also a huge aspect of our collaborative natures and collaborative experience.
And let's study it from a historic standpoint too. Let's go back to the Greeks. And the Greeks said, if I'm going to influence somebody, I'm going to use debate. And basically, debate is a way to argue where everybody follows the same set of rules. And debate says that the rules are we have some activities that we're going to do that will follow logic, logos. We're going to have some rules that follow something called ethos, which is ethics, right and wrong. And then we're going to have some rules called pathos, which are emotions. And they have these rules that allow you to learn how to use your emotions, your logic, and ethics together in order to attempt to negotiate and debate and influence in order to actually get everybody on the same page. Now, collaboration occurs after everybody gets on the same page, but there's a lot we can do to explore all these facets.
There is. And in the couple of minutes that we have left, I'm sitting here listening to Merv and Tim. I want this. I want this for me. How do I get started, Jim?
Well, let's talk about what we talked about last week. Find something that's relatively inconsequential and practice. Number one, see if you can actually get everybody on the same page. It doesn't have to be project oriented. It could be, where are we going to lunch? Okay, we can't agree. Do we have any vegetarians in the room? Do we have to consider vegetarians' interests and needs and expectations as well as non-vegetarians? Now we have a bunch of things, and all of a sudden you're learning to debate through logos and ethos. And you can actually start saying, I don't care. I don't care where we go. I'm going to enjoy listening to you guys talk and participating in good conversation. That's why I'm there. And it doesn't matter. I'll help you get to the restaurant you guys want to go. And so this gives us an idea where we can actually have negotiation, but collaboration in the way we reach to that agreement. And that's where things get really fun. Start with things that are relatively inconsequential. Hone your approach. Figure out what works and doesn't work for you, and then gradually build that into the tool set that you use for the more critical decisions and influences that you need on your project.
You know, I was thinking along very much the same lines. There's a lot of activities on projects that are less consequential that you can learn to. Let's say you've got a deliverable that's due in 2 weeks and you've got ample time, but it would really be much better if you could get Sam to do chapter 1 and Wendy to do chapter 2. And so you bring together your team in something that is less challenging, perhaps. And even in that situation where you can collaborate on a task within an activity within the project and make that happen.
Right. So, right.
Even just starting somewhere. I think you said you used a situation like going for lunch or whatever. I'm going to give you, I learned this or I heard this recently, and it's someone said, learn to collaborate to learn. I thought that was kind of sums this up. Learn to collaborate to learn.
Yes. Create that constantly improving environment. And that's what else I would do. This is a lifelong practice. These human skills, these personal awareness and emotional intelligence skills are something that we don't just get right or wrong. It's something we grow constantly.
Yeah. And if we want to go back to what we talked about just a few minutes ago, build trust, build those open communications. I mean, I don't know how you can collaborate without trust and communication. And even in a team meeting, when things get contentious, you have to be able to trust each other. Back to the team charter that you talked about. You have to be able to learn to work within the rules, trust each other, but you can always work things out just by collaborating in the open communication and with that level of trust.
Indeed.
So is this a good place to kind of close it down?
Yes, it is. And in closing, where can we find you this next week if we want to reach out and ask you questions individually?
Well, I do monitor my LinkedIn account. fact, just as you were asking that question, my other my other monitor here flashed with someone with a LinkedIn question. But I do monitor my LinkedIn account, Merv Jersak, or People First Project Management. And I do enjoy these project management discussions with people who have questions or have um, things to offer us, even from listening to this podcast.
Yeah, yeah, and the same with me. I'm out on LinkedIn, and as that progresses, as I reach out through other social media, please, I'll communicate this both through YouTube and other channels as well.
Yeah. Well, I can't wait again to hear what we're going to say next week, Jim. So
Yes, it's going to be fun. It
it's
it
going to be
it always is. Thanks again for a great conversation, and everybody tuning in. Thanks. If you want to keep involved with us, subscribe, and and if you click on the bell, you'll see us popping up whenever we have a new show for you as well.
absolutely. And thank you, Tim, for helping me even learn a few things today, even in my 40 some years of project management.
The feeling is mutual. The learning is exploring this together. Thanks you, and thank everyone.
Next week.